on to the defense. Top 5 in the nation, top 5 to 6 tackles for loss, havoc rate last season. If we start up front, you lose your 2 D ends, though.
Yeah, and you know, it's not just that they lost the 2 ends and Dalen Hayes and Adi Takumba Ogundeji, but it's 2 years in a row now you've lost your defensive ends. So when you go back to 2018, they had a two deep rotation of Khalid Kareem and Julian Akwara, and then Dalen Hayes and Adi Ogundeji. That was their depth. Well, all 4 of those guys got drafted. They're all gone. So it's kind of that cumulative effect of losing those players. And now there's some guys that got to step into key roles. They moved Myron Tungavaloa out to strong side end, the big end position. He's been a 2-year starter at 3 technique. The problem with Myron at 3 technique, Mark, was he would always wear down by the end of the year because he had a hard time keeping his weight up to 285, 290 to play 3 technique. So he'd be really good in September, early October, then he'd kind of fade late in the year. So they just said, okay, well, let's let him get to a more natural weight, 265, 270, and then move him outside. He had a great spring. He's a guy that is experienced, but he's just now in a new position, and they're going to ask him to be a really good run defender and brings the occasional pass rush. Their second leading sack guy last year was Isaiah Foskey. He had 4.5 sacks and didn't even get to 300 snaps last year. So he's a guy that if you could – I interviewed defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman the other day, and I kind of joked if you were going to build a defensive end in a lab, right, in his defense, he'd be about 6'5", about 250, with super long arms and really twitchy athleticism. Oh, yeah, that's Isaiah Foskey, right? He's got all the skills, but now it's time to turn that skill and that flash into consistent production. Now, the tools are there, but he's got to step up and do it. And, I think the thing that's going to separate this defensive line, Mark, is what we're going to see up front, inside. And the reason they were comfortable moving Myron Tungavaloa to end is because of the presence of Jason Adamiola. I would encourage you, Mark, if you get any free time today, and I know you don't have much because you're working your tail off and getting all this stuff out, go watch the Alabama-Notre Dame game and just focus on number 57 on the Notre Dame defensive line. Watch what he did to the Alabama offensive line. And he did it against Clemson in the ACC championship game. He's an incredibly talented player, former top 100 recruit. It's just been about the opportunity. He's healthy now. He had a great spring. I mean, you could have after every practice in the spring, we got 3-minute highlight videos. I've been told by sources, you could have just put a 3-minute Jason Adamiola highlight video together after every practice, which it gets me excited about him, but then makes me really nervous about the offensive line that they just couldn't block this guy all spring. But he's a guy that I think in this defense, you're going to need more production from the inside. Clark Lee didn't ask his interior players to make a lot of plays. It was do your job, shoot gaps, penetrate, hold up blocks, allow the linebackers to go make a lot of plays, which is fine. That works. There's all types of different ways to be successful. Marcus Freeman's defense wants those guys to make more plays on the ball, and Jason Adamiola is that guy. And honestly, Mark, if you were to take the second string at Notre Dame and their defensive line and say there's probably 7 or 8 teams on Notre Dame's schedule who would love that to be their starting defensive line. That's the difference. 5 years ago, that was not the case. Notre Dame had a really good starting defensive line in 2015. You had Sheldon Day, NFL player. Romeo Okwara, NFL player. Isaac Rochelle, NFL player. Jerron Jones, NFL player. Or Jerry Tillery, Jerron Jones got hurt in fall camp. Jerry Tillery, first-round NFL draft pick. But then you look at what the second team was, and it was a whole lot different than what the first team was. This team can just throw waves at you. And to me, that's what the best teams can do defensively. You can't just have your starting D-line because kids aren't playing 60, 70 snaps like they used to. There's too much tempo. The game is different. You don't have it's a more up-paced game. You're getting more snaps in. You can't do it like you used to. You have to have depth. And Notre Dame's just throwing waves of people. I mean, there's guys that are fighting to be on the third team mark at defensive tackle that 4 years ago would have been playing 30 snaps a game. That's just been the amazing thing, and a credit to Mike Elson for really reloading and restocking that depth chart on the defensive line.
So, Brian, you gave us a hint into what could be a difference between Marcus Freeman's defense and Clark Lee's defense, the use of the defensive tackles and the responsibilities there. Based on your conversation with Marcus Freeman, and everybody should go check that out. Of course, he comes in with a huge upside coming in from Cincinnati. Clark Lee moves on to Vanderbilt as head coach. Have you been able to gain anything else in regards to what Freeman's going to keep in place versus what he's going to tweak?
I think that the nice thing that Coach Freeman's stepping into is he understands that Clark Lee left a great foundation of strong fundamentals. The one difference between the two coaches is Clark Lee is very much we're not going to have a lot of stuff. We're just going to kind of line up and play. And I think that was good in a lot of instances. Notre Dame had better players than most people, but at times it could kind of get them in a little bit of trouble. They asked a lot of their guys. So the players that Marcus Freeman is inheriting already have a really strong foundation in regards to technique and lining up appropriately and understanding the need to be gap conscious and those kind of things. Well, Marcus Freeman's defense is more aggressive. It's more, hey, let's attack. Let's fly downhill. Yes, you need to be gap sound, but at the end of the day, I'd rather you fly downhill 100 miles an hour than just sit back and take on a block because you're trying to make sure that you've got your gap. It's going to be more aggressive. And so you take that understanding of the foundation that Clark Lee left, and then you build on a more aggressive scheme and a more diverse scheme. And as I said, Coach Lee just kind of liked to line up with his front seven. He'd get a little bit creative with his safeties, but he was just going to line up with his front seven, and you kind of knew where Jeremiah Wusu was going to be, and you knew where the Buck was going to be and the Mike was going to be. And it was just like, but you got to be better than us. And most teams weren't. Now it's going to be more one down. You're in a 4-2-5 look. The next play, your Viper end is going to be lined up as a stack linebacker. You're in a 3-3 look. The next play, that Viper is going to be lined up as a stand-up 3 technique on, over on the other side. There's going to be a lot more pre-snap multiplicity than what we saw from the previous defense. The calls will diminish a little bit because if you're going to be more multiple in how you line up, you can't also then have 10 calls out of that look. So you're going to see a little less of that, less volume from a call standpoint, more versatility from how they're going to line up. And then the other big difference is going to be Coach Lee was more of a zone guy, corners playing off, keep things in front of you, don't give up big plays. This defense is going to be much more aggressive. It's going to be a lot more man coverage, a lot more press coverage, a lot more safeties coming down, having to play more man in the slot, kind of guys, guys like that, and just a lot more pressures from the front. So those are going to be some of the big differences that we're going to see from this defense.